We'll start the recording now. And that is Zoom telling us that the recording is in progress. So I'll quickly introduce our two wonderful guest speakers today. But first, I just want to run a quick poll for you all. Awesome. So all of our attendees should see our first poll of the day popping up on their screen there. So if you wouldn't mind giving us a quick rating of your knowledge of celiac disease and gluten-free diets. Alrighty, I'm seeing about half of our attendees have responded so far, which is amazing. And I'll give people another 10 seconds to get their responses in. Wonderful. Thank you so much to everyone for responding to that poll. So today we'll quickly go over what celiac disease is and what the role of gluten is in exacerbating celiac disease. Our guest speakers will also be dispelling some myths around gluten-free diets, and they'll also be going over what the Canadian Celiac Association does and what supports are available for food programs and for people living with celiac disease or living on gluten-free diets. So I am so excited to introduce our two wonderful guest speakers today. We have Nicole Byram, who is a registered dietitian and the health promotions manager with the Canadian Celiac Association. Her journey with celiac disease began 10 years ago when with her mother being diagnosed at the age of 65, followed by both her husband and her daughter. So she has a very intimate relationship with gluten-free diets and 17 years of experience as an inpatient and outpatient dietitian. So she really understands what it's like to be on both sides of the table. Nicole is committed to helping those struggling with symptoms, those newly diagnosed, and empowering our community members. So we're really happy to have Nicole joining us today and speaking to celiac disease. In addition to Nicole, we also have Sue joining us. Sue is a diagnosed celiac and a volunteer with the Canadian Celiac Association for more than 20 years. She now also sits as the chair of CCA's Food Security Committee. In the past, Sue has operated a gluten-free bakery for 10 years and has since hosted 2 seasons of her very own gluten-free baking show. And in addition to that, produced her podcast called A Canadian Celiac Podcast, which aims to educate and inform people on gluten-free diets. Sue has long been interested in empowering those in need to eat gluten-free. The Save Me for Gluten-Free campaign was the answer to working with food banks to ensure those who need gluten-free food have access. So please give a really warm welcome to our 2 amazing guest speakers today from the Canadian Celiac Association, and I will pass it off to you both.
Thank you, Krish. I am going to share my screen now so that I can start my section of the presentation. All right, everybody see that okay? Great. Thank you so much for having me today and for hosting this very important webinar. I'm actually going to turn off my camera so that, oh, maybe I should have done that before, so I can, so that you guys can focus more on the slides than on me. I'm actually just gonna go back to here. Sorry, everybody. I'm gonna stop sharing for a quick sec. There we go. Okay. There we are. Thank you. Okay, so let's get started. So thank you for having me. I'm Nicole Byram, as Krish said, dietitian and health promotions manager with the Canadian Celiac Association. I'm really happy to be here today to talk about this very important topic. So let's get started. So what is celiac disease? Celiac disease is a common disorder that is estimated to affect approximately 1% of the population. It is a condition in which the absorptive surface of the small intestine is damaged by the protein gluten. Gluten is a group of proteins present in wheat, rye, and barley and their crossbred grains. Celiac disease is an autoimmune disease and not a food allergy as many may think. Here you can see a visual representation of villus atrophy that occurs in those with undiagnosed or newly diagnosed celiac disease. As mentioned in the previous slide, celiac disease is an autoimmune disease. Therefore, requiring gluten-free foods is not a choice, and it is not a fad diet. Celiac disease is a serious, lifelong commitment with serious health complications associated with the consumption of gluten. People with celiac disease can present with a number of different symptoms. Those symptoms come in two main categories, classic or typical, and non-classic or atypical. Some examples of classic symptoms include things like chronic diarrhea, abdominal pain, malabsorption, and weight loss. Atypical symptoms include anemia, osteoporosis, extreme fatigue, oral ulcers, liver enzyme abnormalities, constipation, infertility, dental enamel defects, neurological problems, etc. You can hear the list is very long. Additionally, children can present with short stature, irritability, and vomiting. And dermatitis herpetiformis is celiac disease of the skin. This is when patients present with severely itchy or blistering rashes. This diagnosis can be confirmed with a skin biopsy, and treatment consists also of a strict gluten-free diet. How do you diagnose celiac disease? This is a commonly asked question, and it may have crossed your mind also. Diagnosis is not a one-step process, but rather consists of both blood work and an intestinal biopsy. The IgA tissue transglutaminase, or TTG antibody, is the currently recommended test for screening for celiac disease. Patients must be on a regular gluten-containing diet at the time of testing to make sure the results are valid. If your blood work comes back positive, then the definitive diagnosis for celiac disease is made through a small intestinal biopsy. A biopsy is performed via endoscopy by a gastroenterologist. Again, it is so important that gluten not be removed from the diet before the biopsy is completed, as it may impair the confirmation of your diagnosis. The risk for developing celiac disease if you have a first-degree relative is much higher than the general population. For those with a family member with celiac disease, there's a 1 in 10 chance for developing the disease. This is because celiac disease has a genetic predisposition. The only treatment for celiac disease is a lifelong and strict gluten-free diet. This includes avoiding all sources of cross-contamination or cross-contact with other gluten-containing items. This is an image of Canada's Food Guide. Here you can see a healthy plate is laid out in 3 main sections. Fruits and vegetables, which comprise of 50%, whole grains and protein choices, each 25%. This balance was created by informed research and aims at ensuring optimal health for all Canadians with a goal of disease reduction and overall improved health. For someone with celiac disease, each of these main categories poses a different level of risk. Fruits and vegetables are considered a lower risk category for someone with celiac trying to access food. Fruits and vegetables are naturally gluten-free, and here gluten is generally added in the cooking or packaging process. Therefore, consumption of fresh or frozen fruit and veg is generally safe and easy to source for people with any difficulty digesting gluten. Fruits and vegetables are widely recommended for their health-promoting properties. They are rich in many vitamins and minerals, especially vitamins C and A, and also an excellent source of electrolytes and antioxidants. Additionally, fruits and vegetables are recommended as a source of dietary fiber. Protein foods are considered a moderate risk for people with celiac disease, however, still quite easy to find with gluten-free sources. Some protein choices from this category include tofu, nuts, chicken, fish, beans, and other legumes such as lentils. All of these food items listed are naturally gluten-free. However, because of processing, added ingredients, or cooking methods, they may contain gluten or be cross-contaminated with gluten. So it is important to know which items are safe by reading labels or looking for a gluten-free symbol on the packaging. You can see some examples of some gluten-free symbols on the bottom. The grains category is the most difficult to source safely for people who require a gluten-free diet. Here is where wheat, barley, and rye are found. Cross-contamination is common in this category, even when grains are naturally gluten-free. The grains category is where Canadians receive most of their fiber and B vitamins. These nutrients are an essential part of good health, and therefore it is important to ensure that people with celiac disease receive a safe supply of grains. A gluten-free symbol like those shown on your screen allow people to trust and safely consume foods from this category. Here are some examples of foods that commonly contain gluten. These choices are more common and obvious to the consumers. Here are some examples of foods that contain hidden sources of gluten. As a consumer, these are more difficult to spot. Here is where label reading, gluten-free symbols, and the Save Me for Gluten-Free packages are very helpful. For people with celiac disease and those who identify with having difficulty digesting gluten, label reading becomes very important. Label reading allows clients to make informed choices about their food items. Label reading can also help to empower volunteers and employees when helping someone who cannot tolerate gluten. The symbol that you see on your screen, the blue bottom one, is the Canadian Celiac Association's certification seal that ensures that the food product in hand is gluten-free. In order for products to be labeled gluten-free in Canada, they need to be considered safe for people with celiac disease. The Save Me for Gluten-Free program ensures that people with celiac disease and other gluten sensitivities receive food that their body can safely digest. If we consume foods that contain gluten, we see both short and long-term complications. Short-term complications include, but are not limited to, things like an upset stomach, vomiting or diarrhea, skin rashes, bloating, and nausea. Long-term complications from either being undiagnosed or an inability to access safe gluten-free foods may cause more severe and long-term complications. These would include osteoporosis, infertility, nutrient malabsorption, depression, anxiety, peripheral neuropathy. Again, the list is actually longer than this. This is not inclusive. So as you can see, following a gluten-free diet is not optional for this community, but rather is essential for quality of life, disease prevention, and overall health. It would be fun to bust a few myths that are common in the celiac community. Myth number one, celiac disease is easily recognized. Well, I think we could see from one of the earlier categories of the atypical symptoms, this is not true. Celiac disease can be very difficult to recognize since the symptoms are often vague and nonspecific. Symptoms can vary greatly from person to person and can appear at any age. My personal experience is demonstrates this. My daughter being diagnosed at 5, my husband in his early 40s, and my mom in her mid 60s. So we can have diagnosis at any point in life. Myth number 2, celiac disease is a childhood disease. Well, we just discussed that. Celiac disease is an inherited condition and symptoms could develop at any age after the ingestion of gluten. Myth number 3, celiac disease can be outgrown. Celiac disease is a lifelong disease, and eating food containing gluten will continue to damage the intestinal lining and will increase the risk of developing associated conditions and other complications. The only known treatment for celiac disease is a gluten-free diet for life. And finally, myth, a person with celiac disease can tolerate a small amount of dietary gluten once in a while. This is not true. Even though some people with celiac disease may seem to tolerate gluten better than others, damage is still being done to the intestinal lining when the gluten is ingested. So treatment continues to be a strict gluten-free diet for life. Now I thought it would be fun to do some true and false questions. So you can silently answer these in your head and see if you know the answer. People with celiac disease need to know the ingredients of their food and trust that it is safe for them to consume. True or false? True. People with celiac disease need to have the foods that are gluten-free in order to maintain good health. And if they ingest foods with gluten, they may experience both short and long-term complications. Second, if there is a gluten-free claim or symbol on the food product, this is considered safe for someone with celiac disease. True or false? True. In Canada, if food carries a gluten-free claim, then it is considered safe for people with celiac disease. So look for a gluten-free claim or the CCA certification, which is right there on the bottom. Thirdly, having celiac disease is just another fad diet that will pass. False. Being diagnosed with celiac disease is a lifelong autoimmune disease that requires a high level of commitment, and the only treatment is a lifelong gluten-free diet. Finally, people with celiac disease can have small amounts of gluten in their diet. Well, we discussed that in the myth, so I was checking to see if everybody was watching. False. People with celiac disease must follow a strict gluten-free diet to maintain optimal health and avoid complications. Thanks very much, everybody. Looking forward to any questions that you might have at the end.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nicole. And with that, I'll pass it over to Sue, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen, and feel free to let us know a little bit more about supports for food programs and people that are living with gluten-free diets.
Good afternoon. I'm Sue Jennett, a volunteer with the Canadian Celiac Association. I'm here to introduce our new initiative, Save Me for Gluten-Free, a gluten-free food donation campaign from the Canadian Celiac Association. Eating gluten-free is not just a preference. If someone requires gluten-free food, they have two options. They can eat safe, or they can just eat what they're given. And we don't see that as an acceptable option. There are burdens with the gluten-free diet. It's expensive. When we look at the cost of regular food, a loaf of bread as an example, the average cost is $2.87. I actually had to Google that because I never buy gluten bread. Gluten-free, on the other hand, is between 159% and 242% more expensive, bringing the cost of that simple loaf of bread to between $4.56 and $6.95. And I've certainly seen loaves of bread $8 and $9. We would all like to do our part to help with food security. But for those on a gluten-free diet, there are barriers. Many of us on a gluten-free diet have struggled in giving food to a food bank in the past. Why? Because many of us don't ever buy food with gluten or have it in our homes. But purchasing specialty food was a gamble as to whether it was going to get to the people who need gluten-free or be handed out to others. Shopping can be difficult. Those of us on a gluten-free diet have been doing it for some time. There are symbols and ingredient lists. There are many ways to identify gluten-free foods. Lots of different symbols, but some can only be identified by their ingredient lists. We understand the best people to identify gluten-free foods are those who purchase it for themselves. Realizing that food security was an issue for more and more people at the beginning of the pandemic, the Canadian Celiac Association conducted a small survey of how food banks were able to serve their gluten-free clients. So let's see what we found out. Turns out 82% of food banks say they need more gluten-free food donations. 68% of food banks say they need more options for their gluten-free clients. 25% of food banks say they would like help from the Canadian Celiac Association to meet the needs of their gluten-free clients. Now let's find out about your food bank. I have some short poll questions for you. Does your food bank have clients that identify as requiring gluten-free foods? Yes or no?
So Sue, I'm not sure if you're able to see the results there, but 70% of people have said yes, that they do have clients identifying as requiring gluten-free food.
Okay, I'm talking to the right people then. So I end the polling now, do I? Here we go. And how do I go on to the next slide then?
So you can go ahead and close the poll and you can continue your presentation from there.
Close the poll. Okay. The next question is, does your food bank have a separate section for gluten-free foods? Yes or no? So that's about 50-50. The final question is, how comfortable are you with the knowledge of your staff and volunteers about the requirements of those on a gluten-free diet, with 1 being not very comfortable and 5 being very comfortable? So we have heard from food banks and from clients requiring gluten-free foods. We see the need, so we set out to help you fill the need. Our campaign is called Save Me for Gluten-Free. This simple emblem in the form of a sticker or a sign can be attached to a bag of gluten-free donations, either at the grocery store bin or for drop-off directly at the food bank. We appreciate that to help you, we must keep you informed of what we are asking our gluten-free consumers and donors to do. We thought we should start slowly and get to know more of what you do and how you do it. So across the country, regional groups have been asked to reach out to some local food banks to adopt them in an effort to understand their needs and address their challenges in their own communities. We know you love your volunteers and couldn't operate without them. We know you don't want to ask too much of them, and volunteer retention is an ongoing issue. We can provide simple educational materials to help your volunteers understand why gluten-free is important, what gluten-free is, and simple ways to recognize a product as gluten-free. The provision of gluten-free food to those who need it should be a very positive aspect of your work, and we're here to help you achieve that. We recognize that to get a robust gluten-free receiving and giving program in your food bank, you need more than food. The local approach allows us to provide you with signage for your gluten-free shelves, cheat sheets for your volunteers, and other resources, including graphics for a leaflet to be included with a gluten-free package to assure the client these foods have been carefully chosen for them. We can, in some locations, also provide volunteers to help either get the program off the ground or assist with it as it gets established. Get on the list. The website for the Canadian Celiac Association is the place for reliable information and resources about celiac disease and the gluten-free diet. It's often the first site visited by those who are newly diagnosed or have a recently diagnosed family member. This is where we can tell our community that you are working with us. We consider the Save Me for Gluten-Free campaign a win-win-win. It's a win for those of us wanting to contribute as donors to the well-being of those who are celiac or have a gluten sensitivity. It's a win for food banks across Canada to receive the foods and resources they need to segregate gluten-free foods. And most importantly, for the client who is able to get the gluten-free food they require to be and stay healthy. Thank you for listening to our presentation, and we at the Canadian Celiac Association look forward to working with you.
Thank you so much, both to Nicole and to Sue, for your knowledge, your time, and your advocacy for people all over the country who are living with celiac disease or don't tolerate gluten well. I certainly learned a lot from the presentation myself. I think some of the big takeaways that I had are understanding more about celiac disease in general and understanding that it's not an allergy, it's an autoimmune disease, and it's caused by a protein, which is gluten. I learned about some common sources about gluten, but more so the hidden sources. I think it's really interesting that gluten can be found in sauces, dips, soups, etc. And it was great to see some of the different labels that people can use in terms of identifying gluten-free foods. And I can see how that might be confusing or overwhelming for people that are either new or experienced to gluten-free eating. So I really appreciate the knowledge that you've shared with us today. And I hope that a lot of the agencies and community members that have attended today's webinar are able to take away that best practice of being able to keep gluten-free items separately and clearly labeling them with something like a Save Me for Gluten-Free sticker. So with that, I'm quickly going to launch another quick poll just to get an understanding of our attendees' understanding after having sat through your webinar. And then I would love to open up the floor for any questions, comments, etc., for our two wonderful guest speakers today. And as those responses come in, I will just bring up some of the questions that have already been asked in the Q&A. So Jenny asks a question about how do we recognize if imported products are safe to eat or gluten-free?
So I'll answer that one. Thanks, Jenny, for that question. That's a great question, and it's one that I hear quite often. And so hopefully this is probably a question on a lot of people's minds as well. So anything that comes into Canada has to abide by Canadian labeling regulations. So what we want to look at, so if it's labeled gluten-free, that includes Canadian laws. So if it says gluten-free, it is safe, even if it's come from another country and may have been packaged somewhere else. We will ensure that our labeling is on that package and that it is safe for people with celiac disease. So it doesn't matter where it's from. If it's sold here, it has to follow by Health Canada's regulations.
Amazing. Thank you, Nicole. So it sounds to me like any packaged food that comes onto the grocery shelves has to go through some kind of regulation and labeling before it can actually have that stamp of approval.
Yeah, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency makes sure of that. So it's good.
Wonderful.
We're in good hands.
Now I have an amazing question here. I'm assuming from someone who works at a food bank. The question is, we often buy gluten-free bread for a few clients. What else should we buy?
Sue, perhaps I'll let you answer that one.
When I was working with our local food bank, I'm here in Kingston, Ontario. When I was working with our local food bank, I asked them what their greatest need was for gluten-free. And to my tremendous surprise, they said cereal. There's only a few gluten-free cereals that are readily available on the market that are in every grocery store. One of them is Chex Mix, Rice Chex, and honey nut Chex, I guess. And they were saying that those were the easiest things for them to give out to people, because people who may not have a lot of resources can eat them dry. They can eat them with yogurt. Children can eat them. Adults can eat them. And so when we did a local gluten-free food drive, we had a lot of people giving a cereal. And the food bank here was thrilled to get cereal because they felt that they could give it out to any of their gluten-free clients. Because you also have to remember that, as Nicole said, there can be children with gluten-free that require gluten-free. So you can have a family and everybody else can eat whatever from the grocery store, but this child needs separate food. So at least if they had cereal, then they could eat that. And a lot of cereals are fortified as well. So that makes a big difference for them, because not many gluten-free foods will be fortified, but normally cereal will be fortified. So for us, that was a big surprise.
Sue, if I can add in here, it's Melissa from the CCA National Executive Director. We've got a great list of gluten-free food products on our website, a gluten-free food finder that are all carry the certification symbols. So that is a great sort of link or resource for food banks if they want to source out some foods, and maybe they could list those on their website. They could literally pull it from the CCA site. Because then they know that that brand carries the certification symbol and is gluten-free. So that's a great resource.
That's so great, Melissa. And if you wouldn't mind popping the link to that in the chat, I think a lot of our attendees today would really appreciate that. And I'm also very happy to send that out following the webinar. I have a great question from, I believe, a community member. They'd like to know, where can I find out if any food banks in my area are participating?
I can take that. On the Celiac website, we do have that list. If you go there, I mean, we can send you the link for that, Krish. If you go there, you would look up Save Me for Gluten-Free. We can send you the link for the food banks that responded to us and said that they were prepared already to give gluten-free food to clients who requested it. So the idea is, once you're up and running with a program that you feel confident with, we'd like to get your name on that list as well, but I can certainly give you the link to that list.
Perfect. And Sue, if there are food banks in attendance here that would like to be added to that list, how would they go about doing that?
You can contact the Canadian Celiac Association. The email is pretty simple. It's just info@celiac.ca, and in the subject line, just put food bank. And we would be thrilled to put you on that list. The more food banks we get on that list, the more robust the program is going to be. So the more people will be helping. So yeah, that's great.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
I have another question here, which is, what is the percentage of the Canadian population who live with celiac disease?
Yeah, so I'll take that question. So approximately 1% of the population has celiac disease. And if you have a first-degree relative, then it's a higher percentage. So you have 1 in 100 for the general population and 1 in 10 for the population with a first degree or first degree relative.
And that's a significant amount of the population, like 1% small, sounds like a small amount, but when you think about that in the wider scheme of, Canada being several million people, that's a few 100,000.
It definitely is, and I'll point out about 80 to 90% are undiagnosed.
Mhm.
So we have a really low diagnosis rate here generally in fully. So we're really trying to bring awareness of when to test and to increase that diagnosis rate.
And perhaps you can expand on that a little bit. For anyone that's attending today, how would they know when they should go to be screened or talk to their doctor about celiac disease or?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, absolutely. So we're putting together lists of, and we've got an algorithm on our website of when to go, when to get tested, when to ask your doctor for that, the IgA TTG blood screen that you can do. But I went through some typical symptoms. So if you're having chronic diarrhea or abdominal pain, malabsorption, so when I say malabsorption, I mean, if you're discovering that you have anemia for kind of an unexplained reason, that would be a malabsorption of iron. So why would you be malabsorbing iron? Well, it could be because you have an undiagnosed celiac disease. Atypical symptoms, osteoporosis. If you're tired all the time, if you're finding that you have ulcers in your mouth, liver enzyme abnormalities. If you go to the doctor and your liver enzymes are off on your blood screen, well, why is that? There's nothing else necessarily in your disease profile that would explain why. So perhaps it's an undiagnosed celiac disease that's causing it. Infertility is another one. If you're having trouble conceiving and you're having frequent miscarriage, that can be a sign of celiac disease in both the mother or the father. So having both partners tested to see why you may be having infertility issues. Celiac disease could be an underlying cause of that. Another reason to be tested. Dental enamel defects in children, short stature, irritability, vomiting, all of these things. My daughter, when we brought her for diagnosis, she had a lot of skin rashes, a distended tummy. She had some dental issues going on. So knowing also that my mom was celiac, that was kind of a first degree relative also. So if you have a first degree relative, go get tested. So there's lots of reasons. And as I mentioned in my presentation, some very vague and generalized things like who doesn't have fatigue, who doesn't sometimes feel a little run down, but we're trying to bring awareness to the general population and also to the doctors who would write the script to be tested of when to do this.
That's great information. And I'm seeing that Melissa also posted a celiac disease symptom checklist. So that may also be a great tool for deciding whether or not to take that next step of talking to your healthcare provider about it. I'm seeing another great question from Angela here. Angela would like to know, the Celiac Association at one time created a small handbook with ingredients that contained gluten listed in it. Is that book still available?
Melissa, I'm not sure if you want to take this question.
I was waiting for that. So we do have it available. We have to have a limited supply of the pocket dictionary, as we kind of fondly call it. Technically, because of the labeling laws now in Canada, you shouldn't need it if there's someone with celiac disease, because all of the information is on the label itself to make you have an informed choice. But a lot of newbies would like that as a kind of a cheat list. And if they want to reach out to, again, info@celiac.ca, they can inquire. We did sort of pull down our kind of gluten-free shop during the pandemic, but if there's just occasional requirements, requests, we can certainly fulfill those.
Wonderful. And I'm seeing another question here regarding labeling. It's in Brazil, all products must have in the label contain or do not contain gluten. Wouldn't it be easier for the consumer to do the same here?
So that's, yeah, so in Brazil, so it will say contains or not contains. So in Canada, how it works here is if there's a gluten containing item in the product, it will have to be labeled in the ingredients list in a contains or a may contain statement. So it is under regulation that we have to disclose if it is there. So if it does not have that, then by default, it would be considered gluten-free. There are, of course, some exceptions to this, and that would be with the grains category that I was talking about in my presentation. And that is where things like oats do need to be labeled gluten-free because there's a high risk for cross-contamination in that. But so in Canada with labeling, I know different countries have different regulations. I know in the UK, they're bolded and there's some different things as well. So for us, if it's not in the ingredients list, if it's not in a contains or may contain statement, and it is not sort of one of the main in the grains category, would be considered safe for people with celiac disease. So for example, yogurt, if you're reading a yogurt container and there's no obvious gluten and there's not a contains or may contain statement, it would be considered safe.
Thank you. And I think also just having that quick label that says, certified gluten-free can really put yourself at peace of mind, right? Rather than, having to rack your brain looking at the ingredients list and make a snap decision on your own. You can always trust a certified authority like the CCA to put
Absolutely.
on a label.
Definitely, those certifications definitely put people at ease, and it makes them feel more comfortable when they're consuming food. Absolutely.
Now, I do have another question here regarding some of the services that CCA offers. Angela would like to know, do you offer gluten-free baking classes to clients so they know someone in their lives that cannot tolerate things like xanthan gum or certain brands of gluten-free flour mix like Robin Hood just don't work well with them? Are there other suggestions that the CCA might make in that vein?
On the CCA website, there are recipes that can be helpful. There are a number of food bloggers in Canada that are very reliable, and some of them have paid classes and some of them have free classes. There are free ebooks. There's certainly lots of reliable information, and through the CCA, we do have recipes on the website. And many of those recipes are also links to companies that work with us at the CCA. So there is, if you start looking around, there is lots of information there. And yeah, there's lots of information about the bloggers who do teach classes.
Amazing. Thank you for those wonderful resources. And Nicole, were you about to jump in?
I was just going to say, and Sue just did some classes on our website.
Amazing. I can't wait to watch those. Are there recordings available for all of our attendees?
There are links to YouTube videos. The ones that I did are up on YouTube, and there are links on the website as well.
Just out of curiosity, what recipes can we look forward to?
There's lots of different recipes for things like muffins and desserts, as well as main meal things that people who are eating gluten-free wouldn't normally be able to have anything that's breaded, but there's ways to do, breading and simple desserts using simple ingredients like bread and eggs and simple things that people would have in their own kitchens, and frozen fruit, things like that.
That's wonderful. Now, for any of you who don't remember from the intro, Sue ran a gluten-free bakery for 10 years. So I'm, for one, I'm very excited to look at some of those recipes, and that's very exciting. I'm not seeing any more questions coming in through the Q&A box, but while other people draft up some questions if they have any more, I definitely have a couple of questions myself as well.
Chris, there is one in the chat.
Oh, perfect. I must have missed that one. If you wouldn't mind reading it out and letting us know.
It says, I was diagnosed 20 years ago and feel I have a pretty solid understanding of gluten-free foods. Is there a best place to volunteer to help with this initiative, getting gluten-free foods or information out to the community? I happen to live in Toronto. This is from Anne. And Anne, you can certainly contact the Canadian Celiac Association to work with us if you want to help out with our initiative to the food banks. I don't know whether Krish would appreciate the name of someone who is already eating gluten-free, who might want to work within the organization as a volunteer to, to help out once we step back as the Canadian Celiac Association. But you can certainly contact us and offer to help, and we can, put your name through to Krish as well. But there's definitely work to be done, and it's volunteer. So yeah, we'd love to have you on board.
Lovely. Thank you so much for sharing that. I had just a bit of a fun question. It's what is a food that was really surprising for you to find out had gluten in it?
That's a good question.
Well, soy
sorry.
sauce, yes, soy sauce is one of those things that the traditional soy sauce has wheat in it. So we have to be very careful if soy sauce is an ingredient in anything. There is a soy sauce that's made without wheat, and it's usually the cheaper of the soy sauces. And that is something that we just gravitate to, and we'll buy usually a store brand or VH brand because we know it's gluten-free. The other thing is Worcester sauce. So if Worcester sauce is an ingredient in something, there's only a couple of places that make Worcester sauce. If it comes out of the States, it's generally gluten-free because they don't use malt in it, malt vinegar. And if it comes from Europe, it's generally, you have to read the ingredients, but it's generally got gluten in it. So it's one of those things that you just have to be aware of all the time. But once people go gluten-free, they are very brand loyal, and we just keep buying the same brands all the time. But there are a lot of things out there that are surprisingly gluten-free that we can buy fast food. There's different things that we can get that are gluten-free, and we can easily make a full, complete diet around that. And again, we're looking at any meat, any fish, any vegetable, any fruit, just depending how it's prepared.
Yeah. I would say for me, and I'm sorry if my lighting just changed, and I keep glancing out the window, I'm in Vancouver, and the cloud has just descended and the skies have opened up, and it's just started pouring here. So I realize all of a sudden it looks like I'm in this dimly lit space. I don't think there's anybody in Vancouver on the webinar here, but yeah, welcome to Vancouver. It rains all the time. So for me, I would say, Krish, that one of the, being a dietitian, I've sort of been, as you know, too, being a dietitian also, we're taught kind of where gluten comes from and where it's not. But in practice, oats was a really big issue. So oats, as we know, are a naturally gluten-free food. However, because they are a very highly cross-contaminated food. So oats have to be labeled or certified as gluten-free in order to be safe for people with celiac disease to consume. So although, you can buy oats and they're an ingredient in a lot of things, they do need to be certified gluten-free in order for them to be safe for people with celiac, because the cross-contamination, and when I say cross-contamination, just so everybody understands what I'm describing or what I'm meaning, is that an item that is gluten-free naturally may come in contact with a gluten-containing item. And in the case of oats, it could be from the field to the processing plant. So that can be cross-contaminated with a gluten item, and then essentially the gluten is on that product now and is considered unsafe for people with celiac disease. So that was one of our biggest hurdles in our family, to have, at the beginning, and always ensuring that everything that was containing oats were containing certified gluten-free oats.
Oats are definitely surprising. And I know that I've seen on the shelves, they have certified gluten-free oats. And I'd always wondered what the difference is, because I knew that oats are gluten-free.
Yes.
So clarifying that.
Yeah.
So we have about 5 more minutes here. So I just wanted to ask as well, if anyone wanted to get, what steps can people take to help people that are going and using food banks? What steps can people that are donating to food banks take to help support the Save Me for Gluten-Free initiative?
I think just reaching out to the Canadian Celiac Association for, first of all, listing on the website, and then reaching out to us for resources, because we would like to work with you one-on-one. As we found out from the poll, some food banks have their gluten-free food separated and some don't. We would certainly recommend that food banks have their gluten-free food separated on a well-signed shelf. And on that shelf, we can also have some cheat sheets, some information for people who are coming and going from the food bank, because we do understand that volunteers aren't there as regular shifts, 9 to 5, 5 days a week, that there are people coming and going. So the education of the volunteers is always going to be a bit of an uphill battle. So what we'd like to do is make it as simple as we can. And by reaching out to us, then, and again, that would just be an email with the subject as food banks, and just say, you know, we'd like to discuss what we might need here in our particular food bank to get this done. And some different food banks have separate fridges and freezers for gluten-free things. And again, as we see, some do not. And that's the hesitancy of donors to give things to food banks that don't have things separated out. So when we ask people who are on a gluten-free diet to give to food banks, and we can tell them it's going to get to a food bank that is separating things out, and they are giving to people who require gluten-free, they are so generous. They want to help so much, but there is this real hesitancy if they think that their, you know, package of gluten-free crackers that they spent, you know, double the price to buy are just going to go to someone else, and they won't understand that they taste different. And so, yeah, if there's once you've got it set up, then it should work on its own. So if you need help setting that up, or you want individual help, just reach out, because we have people across the country who are prepared to help in a lot of different ways.
That's amazing. And I think, as Sue had mentioned in her presentation too, there is a lot of education that CCA is willing to offer to help your staff and volunteers get up to date on proper label reading, proper sorting, and distributing in a way that can prevent cross-contamination and such. On that note, I do have one quick question that came in through the Q&A box here, and I think we have time for it. And the question is rice something that tends to be cross-contaminated with gluten in processing? So similar to oats.
Yeah, I saw that come through. So thank you who asked that question. That's a really important one. And rice tends to be a staple in so many of our households. So no, rice is one that is not highly cross-contaminated and does not need to be labeled gluten-free. You're fine to eat it, you know, as long as it's just the rice. When rice becomes something that needs to be certified gluten-free, or you have to read the ingredients list, is when it's a rice blend. So if you're, you know, you can buy a Moroccan style rice, or a Cajun style rice, or a Mexican style rice, then you want to read the ingredients list, see what else is in there, and ensure that now this would be a case of read the ingredients. Does it have a contains? Does it have a may contains? And if it doesn't have any may contains of any gluten containing ingredients, you are fine to consume it. But rice in itself, if you're buying just a straight basmati rice or a jasmine rice, or whichever rice that you know, enjoy in your household, it does not need to be labeled gluten-free. It is a safe product to consume. Very good question.
Thanks so much for that clarification. Yeah, it's a great question, and thanks for that clarification. So rice on its own is perfectly fine, but any rice that comes pre-seasoned, you ought to check if there's a gluten-free label on there. So Justin, and I see a cat is coming to join us.
Sorry, he was good for the whole presentation and then just decided at the last minute to come say hello.
Well, with that, I will thank both of you so much for all of your insights today, for sharing your knowledge, for telling us more about celiac disease and gluten-free foods, and moreover, how people can help those with gluten-free foods who are using food banks. So thank you so much once again. And thank you to all of our attendees today who came to learn more about this topic. And please look out for upcoming virtual events coming in our speaker series. Thanks so much, folks. Take care.
Thank you, Krish, for having us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.